Have you ever watched a child learning how to walk? Every parent knows that it's completely gripping. First, they wobble about a bit and then start crawling backwards and then forwards, and then gradually pull themselves up to stand and start taking steps forwards. And you can see the joy that they have in their ability to move forwards and upwards. That sense of moving forwards and upwards is one of the deepest metaphors we have in our society for progress. In fact, it's at the heart of our progress as a species. Throughout history, over millions of years, we have learned to move forwards and upwards. So it should be no surprise, really, that it's also the idea of forwards and upwards at the heart of what we seem to think is economic progress. And in those terms alone, economic progress has been fantastic. Since 1970, the global economy has quadrupled in size. And if you believe mainstream predictions, it's going to quadruple again by 2050. And it's brought with it, it's been accompanied by unprecedented increases in life expectancy, in literacy, in global communications that mean we can be here all connected. And yet, despite all that movement forwards and upwards of the global economy, it's also left us facing some pretty big challenges. Deprivation, for a start. Over 1 billion people in the world still don't have life's essentials: food, water, shelter, energy, healthcare. Add to that environmental degradation. We know that the way we are living today is pushing the planet beyond its capacity to cope with the stress that we're placing on it. And on top of that, inequality. According to Forbes, just 66 billionaires in the world control the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of humanity. That's 3.5 billion people. 66 billionaires, 3.5 billion people. So the way this global economy has been growing has inequality at the heart of it. Of course, our politicians know it. And so even though they're hooked on the language of economic growth, they're trying to caveat it and call for something more. Green growth or greener growth. Make growth good or smart, sustainable. Make it resilient, lasting. No wonder that two Nobel Prize-winning economists, Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz, said, "Those attempting to guide our economy and our societies are like pilots trying to steer without a reliable compass." Well, what if we could put a reliable compass in their hands? What if we could give them a compass that would enable them to steer the economy through the 21st century? And here's one idea for that compass, and it looks like a donut. So at the center of that picture is a space where humanity is putting no pressure on the planet. That's a space of deprivation and destitution for all of us, because we need to use resources to meet our human rights to food, to water, shelter, to stay warm, to travel. So we need to get out of that space of deprivation in the middle by using the planet's resources and get ourselves over the inner ring of the social foundation so that we can all lead a life of dignity and well-being. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we don't put so much pressure on the planet's resources that we start pushing the fundamental systems on which we depend for our well-being out of kilter by causing climate change, ocean acidification, a hole in the ozone layer, biodiversity loss. So the challenge we face, and I think this is the critical challenge we face this century, is how to enable 7 billion people today, growing to 9 billion by 2050, all to have the resources they need to meet their human rights. But at the same time, make sure that we do that collectively within the means of this one planet. If this is the compass, where are we today? In terms of the social foundation, according to the data for which there's data for all those dimensions, more than 1 billion people live below each of those. 13% of the world's population don't have enough food. 19% of people have no access to electricity. 21% of people 21% of people live on less than $1.20 a day. And what about on those planetary boundaries? According to the world's Earth system scientists, they estimate that we've actually pushed ourselves over 3 of those boundaries already, on climate change, on nitrogen use, and on biodiversity loss. And that means that we're actually outside this donut on both sides. We're below the social foundation, we're beyond the planetary boundaries. And the challenge we face is how can we bring ourselves back in from both sides at the same time? It's going to take far greater efficiency in the way we use the planet's resources, but also far greater equity in the way we distribute them between people. And it's not just politicians who need a compass like this to help them steer the economy. What if each of us could put our lives on that table and ask ourselves, how does my lifestyle contribute to pressure on planetary and social boundaries? How does the way that I shop and eat, vote, travel, affect those boundaries? What can I do as a citizen, as a consumer, as an employee, a parent, or a neighbor to help bring humanity back into that space, into that donut, which is a safe and just space for humanity? What if every company in the world designed its strategy around this table and asked, how can we make sure that our company, we do business, we're not actually putting pressure on these boundaries, but the very way in which we do business is helping to bring humanity in those boundaries, is ensuring that we're not putting people's labor rights under stress, we're not causing climate change, but we're actually contributing to bringing ourselves back within there. And what if the world's governments, when they meet at the United Nations, okay, that's not actually the United Nations, but when I presented this to them last year, I said to them, you need a new table. What if you could actually have your conferences around a table like this so that you were looking at our shared challenges? Wouldn't that help you to negotiate not only from short-term national self-interest and corporate interest, but from long-term, collective, common interest? And what if every economics textbook had this picture on the first page? You want to be an economist? Fantastic. There's a few things we should start with right from the beginning. You need to understand humanity. You need to know that people have human rights, and that you need to use resources to meet those human rights. But you also need to know about the planet and about the life support systems that we depend upon, and that we mustn't push ourselves over those boundaries if we want to protect the stability of life that we've enjoyed. With those fundamentals in place, now we can talk about the kind of markets, regulation, banking industry, jobs. What kind of economic system will bring us into that space? And how would we measure what economic progress looks like here? As the ocean scientist Catherine Richardson has said, humanity can affect its own life support system. We are pushing on tipping points. How does that affect the way we define progress? And so that brings me back to our idea as humanity of what progress is. Can we get beyond our impulse for forward and up and find a new meaning of what we think we're doing when we're progressing in our lives? Perhaps we can learn something from this Sufi dancer. He's not trying to go forward and up. He's dancing, dynamic, in flow. He's thriving. Perhaps we could all try to follow his lead and find a new meaning of what we think progress is and a new idea of what economies are for. Thank you.